It's often said, isn't it, that landing a consultant post in the NHS isn't just about, well, how brilliant you are clinically or even your personality as such. One perspective we've seen strongly suggests it's fundamentally about preparation. In fact, good preparation, really meticulously apply, is highlighted as the single most critical factor for success. But for a career step this significant, what does that level of preparation truly entail? I mean, what are the hidden pitfalls and what knowledge goes beyond pure medicine? Welcome to the deep dive. You bring us the material, the articles, the research, the vital guidance documents, and we plunge in to extract the crucial insights, the surprising details, and the foundational knowledge you need to get informed quickly and comprehensively. Today, our mission is a deep dive into the UK NHS medical consultant interview, tailored specifically for you, a mid to senior professional standing at this pivotal career threshold. And guiding us through this, well, quite intricate landscape is our expert, someone adept at synthesizing complex information and illuminating its real world implications.
Thank you. It's a privilege to explore this topic. It really does represent a substantial leap, doesn't it, in responsibility and focus for a medical professional.
It really does. And the sources you've shared provide such a rich, practical roadmap for navigating this challenge. Before we embark on the full exploration, perhaps we could set the stage with a few key points drawn from this material. So, based on what we've reviewed, why is succeeding at the consultant interview considered such a critical and, well, often complex hurdle?
Well, the sources are quite clear on this, actually. The consultant role, it's no longer solely defined by clinical excellence at the bedside. Not anymore. It's increasingly a position of leadership and management. That's the key shift. You're expected to not only provide high-level clinical care, but also, lead teams, manage resources, understand the wider health economy, and navigate complex organizational structures. So the interview itself, it's the gateway to this expanded remit. And its complexity, it really arises from the need to assess capabilities across such a wide spectrum, often by a large and, frankly, diverse panel. It's a test of potential as much as past performance, I'd say.
That makes a lot of sense. And among these many domains, the clinical leadership management, what single factor do the sources suggest candidates perhaps most frequently overlook in their preparation?
That's a great question. One prominent theme coming through from the material is the importance of the candidate's internal state, their self-perception, really. It's about whether you genuinely see yourself as a consultant, embracing all facets of the role, including its leadership and managerial demands. So many candidates focus heavily on the external knowledge and examples, which are important, of course, but they perhaps neglect to cultivate that inner confidence and vision. The sources imply that if you don't project that self-assuredness and sort of genuine enthusiasm for the broader role, it will come across to the panel. It's quite foundational, actually, a piece of preparation that's surprisingly easy to miss.
That's a fascinating point, that link between the internal state and the external presentation. It's not just what you know, but how you are. Okay, finally, thinking about the wider context of the sources present, how has the evolving landscape of the NHS fundamentally changed what's expected of a modern consultant candidate compared to, say, a decade or two ago?
Significantly. The NHS has undergone, well, huge structural and cultural shifts, hasn't it? Heavily influenced by key reports and policy changes. The material points to a much greater emphasis now on accountability, efficiency, safety culture, and understanding the interconnectedness of different parts of the system. Consultants are expected to be not just experts in their field, but active participants in clinical governance, financial stewardship, service improvement, and policy implementation. Reports like Francis and Keogh have really elevated the importance of patient safety and transparency, while initiatives like the long-term plan demand awareness of future service delivery models like integrated care. So the expectation really is of a systems leader, not just a clinical one.
That provides a really compelling framework for our deep dive today. It's clear this interview is about so much more than just your medical CV, isn't it? So let's unpack this process layer by layer, starting right at the beginning. For you, our listener, preparing for this, the sources suggest the groundwork begins long before any interview invitations land. It seems to involve both introspection and quite extensive external research.
Absolutely. As we touched on it, Ghosh and Lisley in particular really emphasize the absolute necessity of defining the outcome you want to achieve in the minds of the panel. What impression do you actually intend to leave? Are you aiming to be perceived as assertive, yet collaborative, highly competent clinically, but also a natural leader, a safe pair of hands who understands risk, or perhaps an innovator ready to drive service development? And this isn't just about crafting sound bites. It involves managing your own internal state, truly sort of inhabiting the persona of a consultant, and genuinely embracing the leadership and management responsibilities that come with the role. It requires a shift in mindset, seeing yourself as already capable of functioning at that level. Without that internal shift, the external performance, well, it might lack conviction.
Right, so it's about cultivating and projecting that consultant identity. And alongside that internal work, the sources place immense value on researching the post and, crucially, the trust itself. Why is this depth of research considered so critical?
Well, thorough research is just fundamental. It demonstrates genuine interest. That's key. It allows you to tailor your answers to the specific context of that job, that trust. And it provides the material you need to ask insightful questions later on. The sources advocate for research before you even apply, and then intensifying it significantly after you're shortlisted. Recommended avenues go well beyond just reading the job description. You really need to delve into the Trust's website, internal documents if you can possibly access them. Look at the Strategic Health Authority or regional planning documents, even national reports like the Chief Medical Officer's annual report. These often highlight key themes and challenges relevant to all trusts.
And the sources are quite specific about visits, mentioning both informal, pre-shortlisting ones, and then the formal visit after you've been shortlisted. What's the distinction there, and why are they apparently so important?
Yes, the visits are considered, well, pretty much not negotiable according to the material. An informal visit before shortlisting, assuming the trust welcomes it, is primarily for your benefit. It's about getting a feel for the department's atmosphere, checking the practicalities, location, facilities, and ultimately deciding if you genuinely want to pursue the application further. You typically contact the lead clinician at this stage. The sources advise against seeking formal meetings with senior executives before shortlisting. That's generally seen as inappropriate at that point. Taking notes is fine, of course. And you should use this visit to ask questions that clarify aspects you've read or seek information not readily available publicly. It's a chance to see if the reality matches your research and your own aspirations.
Okay, that makes sense for the informal one. And the formal visit after shortlisting. The sources are quite stark, suggesting not undertaking this visit can significantly harm your chances. What makes it so crucial, and who absolutely must you try and meet?
The formal visit post-shortlisting is critically important. It's your chance to make a more direct impression on key individuals and gather really in-depth current information. The sources are blunt. Failing to visit is a significant disadvantage. You absolutely must try to arrange meetings with the chief executive, the medical director, the clinical director, and the lead clinician. These individuals will likely be on your interview panel or certainly influential. If possible, the sources also recommend meeting the director general manager for the operational perspective you see, and the departmental modern matron to understand the nursing and multidisciplinary team dynamics. Potentially other key executive directors too, who can offer insights into strategic priorities or specific challenges impacting your area. Understanding their perspectives is vital for tailoring your interview answers. Oh, and don't forget to visit any split sites the post covers. That shows real commitment and foresight.
And being prepared with insightful questions during these visits is key, isn't it? The consultant course handout, one of our sources, gives some excellent examples here.
Precisely. Your questions during these visits should demonstrate that you've done your homework and are thinking strategically about the role in the trust. Examples might include probing the specifics of the proposed job plan, understanding opportunities for developing your special interests within the trust's strategy, asking about the perceived strengths and weaknesses of the team you'd be joining, perhaps inquiring about the trust's response to recent CQC reports or SCP plans, or understanding the impact of their foundation status or any potential mergers on service delivery. Crucially, the sources implicitly advise against discussing salary, banding, or specific terms and conditions at this stage. That's not the focus here. The focus is on understanding the role and demonstrating your fit. Those discussions happen later if you're offered the job.
Right. Keep it focused on the role and the organization at this point. Okay, beyond the research and the visits, the sources highlight the evolution of portfolio preparation. It seems to have moved far beyond just a simple list of cases, hasn't it?
Significantly so, yes. The portfolio is now viewed as a really comprehensive body of evidence supporting your capability across the full consultant remit. While clinical cases remain important, naturally, the forces emphasize including examples of your involvement in, say, complaints handling, risk management incidents, and, crucially, what you learned from them. Business cases you've contributed to or led, how you've navigated difficult clinical or ethical situations, tangible examples of leadership and management activities, and your responses to external visits like CQC inspections. The recommendation is generally to develop this into a well-organized, ideally electronic format, something that allows you to quickly access examples that can be linked to potential interview questions, providing concrete evidence for your claims. Just be extremely careful with patient confidentiality, of course, especially in electronic formats. Avoid identifiable details completely.
Okay, so you've done the deep internal work, thoroughly researched the trust, compiled this comprehensive portfolio. Now let's shift our focus to the interview day itself, navigating that potentially intimidating environment. The panel composition for a consultant post is often quite large, isn't it?
It certainly can be, yes. And the sources prepare you for this. A typical consultant panel is substantial and designed to assess you from multiple perspectives. It commonly includes the trust chairman, the chief executive, the medical director, the clinical director for the relevant directorate, the Royal College representative for your specialty, the lead clinician from the department you're applying to, someone from human resources, often a lay individual representing the public interest, and potentially a university representative if the post has academic links. If the post covers multiple sites, representatives from those sites might also be present. Each person brings a different lens, strategic, clinical, managerial, HR, governance, patient perspective. You need to be aware of that. It's also noted that a medical personnel representative is usually there to manage logistics, but doesn't typically participate in the decision-making itself. Understanding who is on the panel and their likely interest really helps you frame your answers appropriately.
And those seemingly small details, arriving on time, your dress code, even waiting to be invited to sit the sources, cover these, emphasizing their importance for that critical first impression.
Absolutely. These are basic professional courtesies, but they contribute significantly to the overall impression you make from the moment you walk in. Arriving slightly early, say 10-15 minutes, allows you to compose yourself and demonstrates respect for the panel's time. Dress code should be smart, professional business attire. The sources advise avoiding anything overly casual or, conversely, too attention-grabbing, just smart and professional. Waiting for the panel chairman to invite you to sit, or politely asking if you may take a seat, shows good manners. As for greeting, well, a handshake might be appropriate in some contexts, but with a very large panel, a polite nod and acknowledging everyone is generally suitable. You need to sort of read the room, but always err on the side of professionalism and courtesy.
Okay. Now, preparation means anticipating questions, but the sources really stress practicing your answers, ideally out loud. Why is that specific step considered so valuable?
Practicing your answers out loud, perhaps using mock interviews, or even just speaking to yourself, is invaluable for several reasons. It helps you refine the phrasing, ensuring your points are clear, concise, and flow logically. It's amazing how different something sounds when spoken versus just thought. It allows you to identify where you might waffle or use filler words unnecessarily. Crucially, it helps you internalize the structure of your answers and build confidence. So when you're under pressure in the actual interview, your responses feel more natural and articulate, rather than stumbled over or sounding like they're rote learned. It's really the difference between knowing the material and being able to perform with it effectively.
And speaking of structure, the sources strongly advocate using frameworks for answering questions, especially those asking for specific examples or dealing with scenarios. The STAR technique is explicitly mentioned. Could you explain that a bit?
Yes, the STAR technique. It's a highly recommended structure for competency-based or behavioral questions, the ones where you're asked how you handled a specific situation in the past. STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So you set the scene by describing the situation you faced. Then you explain the task you needed to complete or the goal you were working towards. Next, and this is the most important part, you detail the specific action you took. What did you actually do? Avoid just saying we, unless you're describing a collective effort. And even then, specify your personal role. Finally, you describe the result of your actions. What was the outcome? What happened? Using STAR ensures your answers are complete. Provide necessary context, highlight your specific contribution, and demonstrate the outcome of your efforts. The sources note it's particularly effective for questions about handling stress, managing difficult clinical or ethical situations, demonstrating teamwork, negotiation, or conflict resolution. It provides that concrete evidence.
Right. So rather than just saying, I'm a good team player, you'd use STAR to describe a challenging team situation, your specific role in it, the actions you took to facilitate teamwork, and the positive outcome achieved. Makes it much more tangible.
Exactly. It transforms a general claim into a compelling, evidence-backed narrative. The sources also cover other potential assessment methods you might encounter, like presentations and group discussions.
Yes, presentations seem quite a frequent requirement. What are the key design and delivery tips from the sources on those?
Well, if your shortlisting letter indicates a presentation is required, pay close attention to the instructions regarding topic and timing. It's often around 10 minutes presentation.
maybe 10 minutes for Q&A. Common topics include things like proposing service developments, outlining your vision for the future of your specialty, or perhaps discussing training strategy. The design tips from the sources are very pragmatic. Limit yourself to a maximum of 1 slide per minute. That's a good rule of thumb. Keep titles simple and clear. Ensure text is easily readable from a distance. Use large font sizes and good color contrast. That's often overlooked. Critically, the sources advise against relying too heavily on just bullet points. Instead, try to use images, graphs, or diagrams effectively to convey information visually and make points stickier. Ensure they have good contrast and are directly relevant, of course. Avoid excessive jargon or academic referencing. This isn't a university lecture. The focus should be on engaging the panel, being practical, and demonstrating your ability to communicate a clear, relevant message efficiently. And be prepared for the possibility of on-the-spot presentations, where the topic is given with limited preparation time. That can happen too.
Good point. And group discussions. How should a candidate approach those, and what are the assessors typically looking for?
Group discussions usually involve a small group of candidates working through a clinical or work-related scenario while assessors observe. The sources indicate assessors are primarily looking for how you communicate, how you problem-solve collaboratively, and how you interact within a team dynamic. The key advice for the candidate is that you must participate meaningfully. Passive observation or fading into the background just isn't an option here. Engage with others' points, build constructively on their ideas, and contribute your own relevant thoughts. There are strategies for dealing with challenging group dynamics too. For instance, if someone is overly dominant, you might gently try to open the floor to others or pivot to a related subtopic. If someone is very quiet, try to actively involve them perhaps by summarizing viewpoints and directly asking for their opinion on a specific point. It's about demonstrating both your own contribution and your ability to work effectively and respectfully with others in that group setting.
Okay. And psychometric tests are also mentioned as a possibility. What's the purpose behind those, and how might trusts actually use the results?
Yes, the sources refer primarily to personality assessments, things like Myers-Briggs or Belbin team role profiles in this context. Trusts use these not usually as pass-fail tests, but more for additional insight. The results can serve as supplementary feedback for the selection panel. Importantly, they might be used to inform interview questions. For instance, if a candidate's profile suggests they are naturally less inclined towards proactive leadership, the panel might use this insight to ask more targeted questions specifically designed to explore their experiences and comfort level with leadership responsibilities. They might even ask you to comment on hypothetical scenarios related to aspects highlighted by your profile. Just another layer of assessment, really, to understand your potential fit for the multifaceted consultant role.
Right, another piece of the puzzle for the panel. Okay, that covers the practical assessment formats. Let's move now to the key knowledge domains the sources emphasize you must be conversant in, starting with clinical governance. It's fundamental to the NHS, but how do the sources define it and its key pillars?
Clinical governance, yes, absolutely fundamental. As the sources define it, it's essentially the framework through which NHS organizations are accountable for continuously improving the quality of their services and safeguarding high standards of care. While the chief executive holds ultimate responsibility, every single doctor plays a vital role. It's everyone's business. It's often broken down into 7 core components or pillars. The sources list these as clinical effectiveness, using evidence-based practice, audit the systematic review of care against standards, risk management, identifying and mitigating risks, learning from adverse events. Then there's information management, the secure and appropriate use of patient data, staffing and managing people, ensuring competent staff and good working environments, patient experience gathering and acting on feedback, and finally, communication, effective internal and external communication. You really need to demonstrate awareness and, importantly, engagement with all of these areas.
Let's perhaps delve into a couple of those in a bit more detail, starting with audit. It's a common topic.
Clinical audit, yes. It's presented as a key mechanism for driving clinical effectiveness. The sources define it as a systematic process that reviews care against explicit criteria and then takes action to improve care where necessary. It typically follows a cycle or spiral of activity: selecting a topic, defining standards, collecting data, analyzing that data, implementing changes based on the findings, and then re-auditing to check the impact. They highlight pressures and advantages, including its use in appraisal, how it encourages teamwork, and generates evidence for service improvement. Awareness of common challenges and actually implementing audit findings is also important. These are the sorts of things a consultant leader would need to anticipate and overcome.
Makes sense. And risk management, that's particularly salient, especially in the an organization with a memory era, isn't it?
Very much so. Risk management is all about proactive identification, assessment, and mitigation of risks to patient safety. And, importantly, learning effectively when adverse events do occur. The sources reference national bodies like the former National Patient Safety Agency, NPSA, the Clinical Negligence Scheme for Trusts, CNST, and the National Reporting and Learning System, NRLS, as integral to promoting an integrated, system-wide approach to learning from errors. As a candidate, you should be able to discuss your practical experience. Things like your awareness of the Trust's risk management department, your involvement in departmental risk meetings, how you use serious untoward incident SUI forms, and your understanding of the follow-up process to ensure lessons are learned, changes are actually implemented. It's about showing you're part of that safety culture.
Right. Demonstrating practical engagement. Information governance also features prominently, reflecting the increasing digital nature of healthcare.
Yes, information governance, or IG, is crucial. It's all about the secure and ethical handling of patient and sensitive data. The sources mention things like the Information Governance Toolkit and the importance of a statement of compliance for trusts. A key principle highlighted is the default position against transferring unencrypted, person-identifiable electronic data within the NHS. You just don't do it without proper safeguards. Staff responsibilities regarding data handling are paramount. The sources also touch on the historical complexities around, say, the National Program for IT, NPFIT, and the challenges of consent models, that ongoing debate between opt-out and opt-in for sharing patient data, and the move towards hybrid systems. Awareness of the Caldecott Principles and the Data Protection Act is also necessary context here.
Okay. Moving beyond clinical governance, a modern consultant really needs a solid grasp of the wider NHS structure, its, well, constant state of reform, and its complex finances. This section in the sources felt quite dense.
It is dense, yes, but it's crucial for demonstrating that systems-level thinking we discussed earlier. You don't need to be a policy expert, obviously, but understanding the major shifts is vital. The sources outline the basic UK health structures, Department of Health, devolved administrations, etc. They then highlight key reforms in influential reports. Things like the NHS plan back in 2000, which set up major investment and reform goals. The Health and Social Care Act 2012 that significantly restructured the commissioning landscape, didn't it? Abolishing SHAs and PCTs, creating CCGs and the NHS Commissioning Board, now NHS England. Crucially, major inquiries like the Kia Review, looking at hospitals with higher death rates, leading to rapid reviews. And of course, the devastating Mid-Staffs Francis inquiry. That exposed huge cultural failures, a focus on finance over patient care, issues of accountability, and the critical importance of staff feeling empowered to speak up about concerns. That's fundamentally shaped expectations around safety culture and transparency. More recent reports like Bailiwick emphasizing a just safety culture and staff support, and Carter focusing on productivity and efficiency, introducing concepts like care hours per patient day, CHPPD, and influencing job planning, they continue this trajectory. And finally, the NHS long-term plan outlines current strategic priorities: digital transformation, integrated care models, improvements to urgent and acute pathways, tackling issues like delayed discharges. A consultant must be able to discuss, at least broadly, how these national policies and reports impact their local trust and their own specialty.
It's a lot to keep track of. And then there's the financial landscape. Concepts like payment by results, PBR, and healthcare resource groups, HRGs, can feel quite removed from direct patient care for many clinicians, I imagine.
They can, yes. But the sources stress that consultants, as leaders within their departments, need at least a working understanding. PBR, payment by results, is the system where hospitals are paid a standard national tariff for the work they do, based on activity classified into these healthcare resource groups, or HRGs. The sources discuss the incentives this creates, for example, to maximize activity, and also the issues, like pressure on coding accuracy and the importance of timely discharge summaries for correct payment. They explain how budgets flow, with the bulk going to commissioning bodies, historically PCTs, now CCGs, or integrated care boards in NHS England, and how services within the trust are often governed by service level agreements, SLAs. Understanding basic departmental costs, distinguishing direct costs you might influence from absorbed costs like overheads, and even glancing at concepts like EBITDA from trust accounts can provide valuable context when discussing service development or efficiency. The sources also cover CQIM payments, commissioning for quality and innovation. That links a portion of funding to achieving specific quality and innovation metrics, including best practice tariffs that reward adherence to optimal pathways. This system directly impacts departmental income and priorities, so you need some awareness.
And the sources also touch on the relationship with the private sector, specifically independent sector treatment centers, ISTCs, noting both criticisms and some outcomes data. How should one approach that?
Yes, it's important to acknowledge this aspect impartially, as the sources seem to. Criticisms often leveled at ISTCs have included concerns about cherry-picking simpler, more profitable cases, potentially leaving more complex patients for the NHS, and also concerns about the potential impact on NHS training opportunities by reducing exposure to certain procedures. However, the sources also cite outcomes data. For example, audits comparing outcomes between NHS and ISTCs in elective surgery have sometimes shown comparable patient-reported outcomes. Some analyses have suggested slightly lower complication rates in ISTCs in certain areas, though it's always crucial to acknowledge potential case mix differences when comparing. The sources encourage being aware of these points of debate in the data presented and just reporting them neutrally if asked. It's about showing balanced awareness.
Okay, showing awareness of the different perspectives. Moving on to people, training, and regulation areas directly impacting the teams a consultant leads and works within. Modernizing Medical Careers, MMC, the European Working Time Directive, EWTD, Hospital at Night. These have profoundly changed medical training erodas over the years, haven't they?
They absolutely have. Profoundly is the right word. Modernizing medical careers aimed for a more structured, competency-based training pathway, theoretically shortening the overall training period for many. However, as the sources and subsequent reports like the Tuke inquiry highlighted, it faced significant issues. Concerns about the quality and consistency of training, the creation of a large cadre of doctors in non-training posts, often referred to as FTSDAs or trust-grade roles, and a sense for some trainees of having lost a clear, predictable career path. The European Working Time Directive, EWTD, imposed strict limits on working hours, mandated rest periods, annual leave entitlements. It fundamentally altered junior doctor rotas. Hospital at Night, HEN, was largely a direct response to EWTD compliance pressures. It aimed to maintain safe patient care overnight with fewer junior doctors on site by introducing multidisciplinary teams often coordinated by senior nurses. While it helped meet EWTD compliance, it also raised challenges around ensuring junior doctors gained adequate exposure to acute specialty-specific interventions during out-of-hours shifts. Consultants need to understand these changes as they impact workforce planning, training opportunities within their department, and their own supervision responsibilities.
And the regulatory bodies, the GMC, PMETB's legacy now with HEE, and the whole process of revalidation.
Yes, key players. The sources clarify the roles. The General Medical Council, GMC, maintains the medical register, oversees fitness to practice procedures, and works to maintain public confidence in the profession. The Postgraduate Medical Education and Training Board, PMETB, historically sets standards for postgraduate training. Much of this function is now delivered or commissioned by Health Education England, HE, which is responsible for training planning and funding. And revalidation, that's the ongoing process, linked strongly to the Shipman Inquiry's recommendations, requiring doctors to demonstrate regularly that they remain fit to practice. It's typically based on annual appraisal, where doctors present supporting information in a portfolio, leading to a recommendation from their responsible officer to the GMC, usually every 5 years. The sources underscore the importance of lifelong learning, continuing professional development, CPD, and the designated budgets for this. They also stress the consultant's crucial role in teaching and training junior colleagues and students, outlining characteristics of an effective medical teacher. That's a core part of the job.
Before we look at how to demonstrate those broader generic skills, the sources also dedicate quite a bit of space to ethics and legal issues, highlighting 4 core ethical principles.
Yes, they are foundational, aren't they? The sources explicitly list the 4 ethical principles commonly applied in medical decision-making. Autonomy, respecting a patient's right to make their own informed decisions. Beneficence, acting in the patient's best interest, doing good. Non-maleficence, avoiding causing harm. And justice, treating patients fairly and equitably, considering resource allocation. You should be prepared to discuss how these principles guide your practice, particularly when faced with complex situations or ethical dilemmas.
And the sources provide quite specific scenarios, things like capacity, confidentiality, breaking bad news, end-of-life care. These seem designed to test applied ethical and legal understanding, not just theory.
Exactly that. You need to demonstrate not just theoretical knowledge, but the ability to navigate these real-world complexities with good judgment and, crucially, a process-driven approach. Assessing capacity, particularly under the Mental Capacity Act 2005, is key. Understanding that it's about the inability to make a decision due to an impairment of mind or brain function, not simply making an unwise decision. Always starting with the presumption of capacity. Acting in the person's best interest if they lack capacity, considering less restrictive options first, and giving equal consideration to past wishes and values. Confidentiality is paramount, guided by GMC principles. Know when and how to seek advice from senior colleagues, defense organizations, before considering disclosure in difficult situations. The sources offer specific scenarios to test this. Handling HIV status disclosure, focus on reassurance, checking drug interactions, knowing when disclosure might be justified for safety reasons, but always seeking advice first, not automatically telling partners or family unless specific legal or safety duties override confidentiality and advice is sought. Managing a 14-year-old seeking termination, understanding Gillick competence and your duty to assess competence while being acutely aware of safeguarding concerns that may necessitate disclosure again after seeking advice. Or dealing with a patient driving with a serious mental illness, balancing patient confidentiality with a duty to the DVLA and the public, knowing when and how to seek advice and potentially inform the DVLA, often after discussing with the patient first if safe and appropriate. Breaking bad news requires a sensitive, structured approach, preparation, right environment, checking understanding, planning follow-up. End-of-life care is presented as a multidisciplinary process involving careful communication with the patient if able, and relatives, with appropriate consent capacity considerations, listening actively to their views, and providing support without burdening them with the ultimate decision. It's all about demonstrating empathy, robust process, and knowing when to seek expert legal or ethical advice. You don't have to have all the answers, but you need to know the process and when to ask for help.
That level of detail really highlights that the interview is probing much deeper than just clinical knowledge, doesn't it? It's assessing your judgment, your communication skills, your ability to function as a responsible consultant within a very complex system, which leads us neatly into demonstrating those broader generic skills that the sources say are often tested through scenario and specific example questions.
Precisely. The panel uses these question types, the tell me about a time when, questions to evaluate competencies like communication, leadership, management, teamwork, organization, coping with pressure, dealing with criticism, negotiation skills. The list goes on. The sources strongly recommend using specific examples from your professional career, but they also suggest, interestingly, drawing from hobbies or outside interests where relevant if it genuinely illustrates a skill like teamwork or resilience. It can provide a more rounded picture.
Communication is such a broad term, isn't it? What specific aspects do the sources seem to emphasize under that heading?
It goes beyond just clear verbal and nonverbal delivery, yes. The sources include active listening, paying proper attention not just to the words but the body language, and being comfortable with using silence effectively. It's about conveying messages clearly, concisely, and adapting your language and style to suit the audience, whether that's a patient, a junior colleague, a senior manager, or indeed the interview panel itself. And importantly, includes effectively handling conflict situations through communication. Leadership and management are also often explored. They're differentiated. Leadership often seen as setting vision, inspiring, influencing, driving innovation, whereas management is more focused on planning, organizing, coordinating, facilitating resources and processes. However, the sources acknowledge significant overlap, and a consultant role absolutely requires both. Qualities of a good leader mentioned include setting clear objectives, empowering others, being available and approachable, communicating effectively, being a skilled problem solver, and being adaptable to change. Management examples you should be ready to discuss might include resource utilization, developing business cases, planning and implementing service developments, like setting up a new clinic or pathway, or perhaps project management experience, like implementing a new IT system. Concrete examples are key.
The sources offer some interesting advice on the language you use in your answers, suggesting you avoid vague phrases and try to employ power words. Could you expand on that?
Yes, this is a subtle but potentially impactful point. The sources recommend using specific assertive language and action-oriented verbs, power words, to convey confidence and highlight your direct contribution. Avoid passive or vague phrasing like, I would be happy to, or I was involved in, or I was lucky enough to. Instead, use proactive language like, I initiated, I led, I implemented, I developed, I resolved, I proposed. Rephrasing sentences to clearly state your action and your role makes your answers much stronger and projects a greater sense of agency and ownership. For instance, instead of an audit project I was part of found, perhaps say, I conducted an audit which demonstrated. It's a small shift, but it sounds more proactive.
Makes you sound like you were driving it rather than just along for the ride.
Exactly.
And tailoring your answer specifically to the post and the trust you're applying for, that seems like another absolutely crucial element that comes up repeatedly.
Absolutely essential. Your answers should demonstrate that you haven't just prepared generic responses that could apply anywhere. Make them relevant by referencing specific details about the specialty as it operates in that trust, the trust's strategic objectives you learned about during your research and visits, known local issues or challenges, or unique aspects like split sites or ongoing local reforms. When discussing service development ideas or how you tackle challenges, frame them within the specific context of that department and that trust. This shows you've done your homework properly, are genuinely interested in this particular post, and are thinking practically about how you would fit in and contribute right here.
Right. It shows you've pictured yourself in the role in that place. Now, handling the "what are your weaknesses" question is notoriously difficult. The sources suggest a constructive framework, don't they?
They do, yes. And the advice is generally to be honest but strategic. The recommended framework is usually to identify a past weakness, something you've genuinely worked on, not a current flaw you haven't addressed. Then, clearly explain the specific actions you have taken to address or mitigate that weakness. What did you actually do about it? Crucially, describe what you learned from identifying and working on this weakness, and how your behavior or approach has changed as a result. Show the development arc. The sources caution against using cliché weaknesses like "I'm a perfectionist," unless you can back it up with a very detailed, compelling example of how you've actively and successfully managed its negative impact, turning it into a moderated strength perhaps. Examples provided might include things like learning to set better boundaries to avoid burnout, or learning to delegate effectively rather than getting bogged down in unnecessary detail, always focusing on the process of improvement and the positive outcome.
So, self-awareness coupled with evidence of action and learning. Okay. Dealing with difficult colleagues seems to be another common area for scenario questions, testing interpersonal and conflict resolution skills. What's the approach advised there?
It is a common theme, yes. And the sources reiterate a structured, professional approach. This usually starts with approaching the situation with empathy, trying to understand the underlying reasons for the colleague's behavior, if possible. Ideally, you'd address the issue privately and constructively with the colleague first. However, if the issue persists, escalates, or critically impacts patient safety, you must involve senior colleagues. That might be your clinical director, the guardian of safe working, or the medical director, depending on the context and local policies. Patient safety always remains the paramount concern. That overrides almost everything else. For very serious matters, such as suspected criminal acts or significant fitness to practice concerns, contacting the police or the GMC might ultimately be necessary. But the sources strongly advise seeking advice first from your seniors, the trust's HR department, or your medical defense organization before taking such significant unilateral action. It's about demonstrating a process that prioritizes patient safety, follows trust policy, shows good judgment, and involves seeking appropriate support and advice at the right time.
That provides an incredibly thorough overview of the preparation and the substance of the interview itself. Finally, there's that standard closing question you nearly always get. Do you have any questions for us? How should a candidate approach this, according to the sources?
Yes, that final hurdle. This is actually a final opportunity to make a good impression and reinforce your interest in preparation. Don't waste it by saying, "No, I think you've covered everything." The sources advise having several thoughtful, pre-prepared questions ready. The best questions are those you couldn't easily find the answer to through your research or the job description. Show you've dug deeper. Focus on things like the trust's future plans for the service or department, specific initiatives they are undertaking, perhaps linked to the long-term plan or recent reports you've read about, the team culture you observed or heard about during visits, or perhaps the impact of recent changes, like a CQC report on the department's priorities. Definitely avoid asking about salary, terms and conditions, on-call frequency, or anything that was clearly stated in the job advertisement or easily found on the trust website. That just looks like you haven't paid attention. Ask questions that show you are thinking ahead, are genuinely interested in the role's context and the trust's direction, and are keen to contribute. And when leaving the interview, just a simple, polite thank you to the panel for their time is sufficient.
This has been a truly exhaustive deep dive into the multifaceted challenge of the UK NHS medical consultant interview, drawing so much practical wisdom from this material. Let's try and distill this down into just a few key actionable takeaways for our listener who might be embarking on this process.
Okay. Firstly, I'd say embrace preparation not just as a task, but as the core determinant of success. Really know yourself, understand the post inside out, and research the trust meticulously, including conducting those vital visits, both informal and formal.
Right. Secondly, don't just have answers ready, structure them effectively. Utilize frameworks like STAR, especially for behavioral and scenario-based questions, to ensure your responses are clear, complete, and really highlight your personal contribution and its outcome.
Thirdly, demonstrate your awareness of the broader NHS context. You need to understand clinical governance, key reports and reforms like Francis and the long-term plan, and the basics of NHS finance, and be ready to discuss how these impact your specialty and the specific trust you're applying to. Fourthly, identify and be ready to articulate your generic skills, leadership, communication, teamwork, management, using specific tailored examples from your experience. Practice discussing how you handle challenges, difficult situations, and navigate complexity with a structured, professional approach. Show, don't just tell.
And finally, perhaps come prepared with insightful questions for the panel. Questions that showcase your genuine interest, your forward thinking, and your understanding of the trust's specific context and future direction.
Those are indeed the critical pillars that come through from all the sources, I think.
So for you, our listener, as you navigate this significant step, perhaps consider this. With the NHS long-term plan focusing increasingly on integrated care systems, digital transformation, and population health management, how might the core skills and knowledge areas expected of a consultant continue to evolve? And how will selection processes perhaps adapt to find leaders equipped for that future? That's certainly a challenge and an opportunity worth reflecting on as you prepare. If you found this deep dive valuable, please consider rating and sharing the show with your professional network on LinkedIn or X. Thank you so much for sharing your insights from this material today. It's been incredibly helpful.
It's been a pleasure to delve into it. A really important topic.
And thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another essential topic.